pollutants with nuclear power.
Professor de Kluyver, thank you very much for visiting the Commission today. What keeps global leaders awake today?
Thank you and good morning. I'm very glad to be here today. Regarding your question, as I travel around the world and meet leaders in business and in government, there's a remarkable consistency in terms of the things they say about what keeps them awake. Number one, of course, is all the uncertainty today in the global economy. Here in Europe, you're wondering whether the euro will survive, what is happening to the debt situation. In the US, we have an election coming up, and the deficits and the long-term outlook are clearly a concern. In China, there is a bubble brewing, according to some people, that if it explodes could have major ramifications. And of course, there's lots of other uncertainty across the world. The second category of issues have to do with what I call tectonics, major international forces that sort of slowly change the environment. For example, of course, global warming is one of them. We increasingly see the impact of global warming as it goes, but there are more subtle changes. For example, the whole issue of population growth. We now have at least almost 100 cities that have more than 10 million people in it. Most people couldn't name more than 5 or 6. All these kinds of things have enormous implications for the future and how you lead organizations and countries. The third category of issues has to do with the changing landscape of competition. 10 years ago, major competitors came from very predictable places. It was Europe, it was America, or it was Japan. Today, I think the landscape has changed. The center of gravity for competition has shifted to the Far East. There are new competitors we haven't even heard of. And as a result of all of that, the rules of the game are changing. And so legislators and leaders have to keep up with what can be done to preserve what's good and to protect what's good. And then finally, in all of this, there is a regulatory challenge. What can we do to keep the playing field level? Because only if we do that will we get a chance to compete our way out of the current problems.
The current economic context is dramatic in Europe as well, and how your research findings can help policymakers here in the Commission also to design policies to restore growth?
That's a very important question. As I just alluded to, with all these changes going on, I believe the first task of any regulatory authority is to look at this level playing field issue. And what we learned there is that the more we can keep markets open and the more we can have fairness rules that apply to all competitors, the better our prospects are. And so the temptation is, in times of economic stagnation, to start protecting and to put a tax here and a regulation there. So the first thing is, don't do these things. Keep things as open. And then second, I think be forward-looking. I think as some countries have already discovered, investments in infrastructures, investments in future competitive playing fields are going to be very, very important. So I would point those as two very important issues for regulators and for government officials.
Finally, which are the major challenges our enterprises has to face when going global?
For companies looking at global opportunities, the major issue right now is global uncertainty. Investments today in a global enterprise are measured in the billions, not the millions. Would you today make that kind of a commitment for your shareholders, either in China or in Latin America, given the fact that both the economic and sometimes the political situation is not totally stable? So that's first. Second, if and when you do, you have to be aware that one thing has not changed in this global world. And the fact is we do have different cultures and cultural rules. And sometimes the assumption is made that being global means we have a new global culture. And I think as many CEOs have found out, that's not the way the world functions. That we have to respect some aspects of distance, that cultural distance, that backgrounds and histories still count. We even see that within Europe today. And then third, the issue that I mentioned of the changing competitive landscape. Competing with Chinese companies is different from competing with European companies, if you're an American one. Or conversely, if you're a European company, it's very different to when you're grown up competing against American companies, now to face Far Eastern companies. They have different advantages, they have different state support, they have different rules of the game. And so there are lots of issues for CEOs to worry about. And that's their particular challenge, but then there are some rewards too.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
Mr. Friedman, how comes you propose to organize this event with an American professor?
Yes, it's actually a particular pleasure to invite Professor de Kluyver to come to the Commission. Particular because we really have at least three things in common. One is that we are both European, actually. I'm Swedish and he's Dutch. The other is that we both choose to study for our first university degrees at an American university, and actually the same university, the University of Oregon on the West Coast. And thirdly, we choose, after our, let's say, respective graduations, we choose to devote our lives to international affairs, transatlantic relations, and global problems and issues. And so when I heard now that Professor de Kluyver was visiting Europe, I was trying to get him to come to Brussels to see us, because of course I ended up doing this work in the European Commission. He ended up becoming one of the leading academics now on how to develop global strategy, global issues. How do you make companies thrive and work in today's competitive environment? Well, that's exactly what keeps us awake at night. And so I thought this was a perfect match to offer him the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you for this initiative.
Thank you.